2, 1. Oh, I don't know how long it takes. All right.
Live streaming is on.
We should be live now.
Hello.
Hello.
So, hello everyone. I think we're live on YouTube. So, welcome to this new Q&A. Sorry, I have to shut down the actual video that was starting. Sorry. So, welcome to this live Q&A of the Godot developers for the month of October. So, today we have like the usual 6, but maybe for next rounds we can invite some more of the other contributors that are working on their free time. So if you're not familiar with everyone yet, I can quickly say, okay, here's Juan, the lead developer, can say hi. Gilles, who is going to start working full-time on Godot on Monday. On tons of things, but especially editor, usability, and stuff. There's Kalinu, who started working full-time on Godot this month to work on the website, infrastructure, and various tooling around the Godot ecosystem. There's George, who is working on GDScript and who is starting to work on GDNative. And Fabio, who works on networking and the web part of Godot, and you should check out his last progress report about the web editor version that was published yesterday. And me, I'm Remy, the project manager. So as usual, we have some questions that we prepared from patrons that asked us beforehand. And then we will also take questions from the chat. So if you check in the description of the video, you will see some instructions like to ask us questions. Please use the !question prefix, and then you can ask your question. That makes it filtered in a system that we have so that we can easily see the question through all the activity on the chat, which is usually very lively. And that's it. Let's start with the first question. So we have a question from Monster Vial asking that they've seen lots of tutorials that save and load games using resources types in the user folder, but the official documentation recommends a more manual approach. Is using resources for saving a hack, or is it a legitimate way to save or load? So I think, Kalinu, maybe you can talk about that. Hugo, I mean.
Yes, so I think using resources to save and load your game is a perfectly legit way to save your game. That said, you can also you consider using the config file class, which is a kind of a middle ground between using JSON manually and using resources. But if you want to use resources, you can. Just be aware that if you load and save scenes made by users, that these scenes may contain a script that may be run if you load the scene. So that may be a concern for security, but with resources, you won't have this problem. So it's fine to save and load resources from users.
Right, thank you. So next, maybe a question from Juan about the roadmap. Sergey is asking us, when is OpenGLES 2 support coming back to Godot 4?
I'd like to know when GLES 3 is going to come back first, but yeah. So yeah, for Godot 4, for now the plan is to only ship with Vulkan, and then probably 4.1 we have back GLES 3. The reason is that the rendering changes have been so big and so large that we are seeing that it will be taking a while to test everything and make sure it's bugless and that the API is like final. So because the whole rendering code is like written anew, we prefer to make sure the Vulkan API is okay and it's good and everything works the way it has to work. And then we add GLES 3 support, because otherwise it will be very difficult to find all the bugs and issues in both APIs, especially because any change in one API, you have to replicate in the other API. So it's more complicated. So once GLES 3 is back, I suppose it will be rather easy to get GLES 2 also to get back. For now, the idea of GLES 2 is that it's going to be 2D only. There's not going to be 3D and GLES 2 at least on Godot 4. At least not officially support. There's contributors that want to contribute code so this happens. So if they do, it's okay. We will merge it. But the idea is that GLES 2 is like optional. If you really want to use it, you're going to have to use it there. Maybe you will have to compile it. I'm not sure yet. Because the reason is that when we made Godot 3 with OpenGLES 3, most of the mobile phones, Android and iOS, didn't support GLES 3. But now it's different. If you look at the Google dashboard, if you look like on Google, just put Android dashboard, you can get statistics about the OpenGL and Vulkan versions on all the phones that run Android. And nowadays, like GLES 2 only phones are like only 10% or something like that, and it's going back. It's going down very quickly. So by the time we support Godot with OpenGL again, that number will probably be like 5 or 3 or something like that. So GLES 2 is not a priority because now 3 runs everywhere. So yeah, I guess that the actual answer is probably after 3 is implemented, probably Godot 4.1 at this rate. But yeah.
Right, but yeah, nothing is set in stone. We are playing it by the ear, but as Juan says, the aim is to get Godot 4.0 released as soon as possible, which might mean delaying some of the more time-consuming stuff to 4.1 so that we can also already have a lot of testing of what is in Godot 4.0. But for those who need OpenGLES 2 and 3 support, remember that we will keep supporting the 3.2 branch for a long time. So even once Godot 4.0 is released, we will still keep supporting Godot 3.2. So it will be maybe a gradual transition towards the Godot 4 world to ensure that eventually everyone can hop on the train, but it might not be like for everyone Godot 4.0. So another question that we have from Nathan Warden, who is asking that he's working on a 3D game that has a pretty high draw call count, greater than 1,500, even though it's a fairly simple game. He's asking if there are plans to support some sort of batching of mesh instances in the 3.x releases, or any advice as to how to get the draw calls down when most of the instance objects share the same material. So I don't know, maybe that's also something Juan can talk about?
I think there was some tool that somebody was working on. The problem with 3D is that for doing batching, you have to do it offline. It's not like 2D. In 2D, when you batch things like you batch rectangles to draw, in general, in 2D, you can batch in real time. You just put everything in a buffer and just throw it to the renderer. But for 3D, the amount of vertices is usually way too big to do batching in real time. So you have to do offline batching anyway. So your batching is probably going to be in the editor. You just pick a lot of objects and it will merge them into one. That should reduce the draw call amount. I don't think that amount is, I mean, the one mentioned by Nathan, I don't think 1,500, something like that is not very much. If you sort by material, OpenGL is very efficient and is not going to be like doing a lot of reconfiguration of state. But truth is that it's not going to be the performance for a very high amount of draw calls is not going to be great until we reach Godot 4 with Vulkan, because Vulkan really does improve that a lot. But yeah, if you use the same material in general, you don't need to do much batching in 3D. But yeah, if you eventually need to do batching, it will need to be done on the editor, like already offline, not really in real time. I guess that's the answer.
So next we have a question from Jasper Brooks saying that what are the plans for Oculus Quest 2 support, and will it have like more features? How is OpenXR going in the engine? So I can answer that. So Oculus Quest 2 was released recently, but it's already supported by the same plugin as the Oculus Quest 1. I can maybe I could give the link in the chat if I find it, but it's in the asset library. It's fairly easy to find. Let me post it now. And I haven't looked yet into details, but I think the team is working already on like supporting the newer features. And so it's probably in the works. And for OpenXR, there's also some work being done by Bastian and Christian, I think. There's already OpenXR support in a plugin for Linux, and Bastian is working on adding support for Windows. And eventually the plan is to have OpenXR support for all platforms and all headsets that support it, because we do believe in all open standards. That's why we use OpenGL, we use Vulkan, and OpenXR is, of course, quite interesting for us to support VR devices with a unified interface. So next, there's a question on what are the plans for LOD systems in Godot 4?
I'm going to start working on that in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something like that. It's on the list now that all the features are mostly complete for Godot 4. The focus now is optimization, and stuff like LOD or occlusion cooling or these kind of things are all part of the optimization. So I guess that's going to happen in a few weeks. That's it.
All right, and then last question from Patreon for this round. We had less questions this time, maybe because we also announced it a bit late. Sorry about that. So I'm not sure if it's a question or a bug report. Maybe you guys can help me figure that out. Which is there work being done to improve the plugin system handlers with respect to RIDs? Because apparently currently plugins require to be turned off and back on between script changes to prevent RID memory leaks. I don't know, George or Juan, if you know about that.
Yeah, I don't really know about this. I think it's more about the way script reloading works. I'm not sure why it would leak an RID, to be honest. So I guess it's a kind of a bug report that we have to investigate to see what's really happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I would also say the RID leak sounds like a bug report might help. I do think that we have problems with hot reloading, which are more general, like reloading scripts on the fly when they are being changed, which can be relevant for like tool scripts or for C#, or especially when you're editing from external editors. I'm not sure what's the exact plan for that. I know that Ignacio looked into this at some point, and I don't remember what's the exact plan, but yeah, that's something that might need some changes so that it's addressed properly in Godot 4. But it's a fairly tricky issue from what I remember.
I have no idea. I don't think I understand it. I think it's probably a bug report or something like that.
All right, so now we will switch to taking some questions from the chat. So we already have some listed. As a reminder, if you want to ask questions, you can write in the chat using !question as a prefix. You might see others doing it, so you can do the same. And then we cherry pick the one which we know we can answer. So let's start with one which ask which tutorial expect from our own documentation is the best one for a total newcomer who just discovered Godot. Hugo, maybe you can answer that?
Yes. Yes, so I think the best tutorial will depend on your level of experience. So if you have no experience doing any kind of programming, I would recommend taking a look at Kids Can Code YouTube channel, which has many tutorials on using Godot and learning programming. And if you have more experience with programming, but you don't have experience with using a game engine like Unity or Godot, I will take a look at GDQuest or Artbeast, which are pretty well known in the Godot community.
So there's quite a few questions on when will Godot 4 be released. So we can say that, like last month, we don't know. What we can say is that it's not going to be released in 2020. That seems fairly obvious by now, even though that was obvious for a long time already. If you want to guesstimate, I would say maybe in the first quarter of 2021, we might have started stabilizing a bit, like have feature freeze, so we no longer include new features and we focus on fixing bugs until it's ready to release. But as to when the final release would be, I cannot give an estimate yet. So one question for Juan, I would say, are there any long-term plans for a dedicated deferred renderer for exclusively high-end 3D games?
Yes, that's the idea. The problem is that when you make a renderer for a game engine that is so general purpose as Godot is, you need to prioritize that it covers as most use cases and flexibility as possible. So the current renderer that's going to come out with Godot 4 is going to be mostly a very flexible renderer that you can do a lot of stuff with it. You can do many types of game, many types of art styles. It has to be able to run on very low-end computers besides the high-end computers. So we aim for stuff that is very flexible and it takes like the least amount of work for you to get there where you want. This is why, like, for example, we don't use right now any kind of temporal anti-aliasing or these kind of things, because that requires you to, if you write a shader or something, to write all the motion vectors, and this is not very easy for a lot of people. Plus, there are other issues like handling transparency that need to be like done, like especially. Also, it means that you have to probably use deferred rendering, which takes you flexibility away from the materials and the lights. So the idea is that the Godot that's coming out, Godot 4, will probably not be the same kind of rendering engine that you will probably see like in something like a AAA game. Like the newest Assassin's Creed or something like that, because they know exactly the game they are doing and they can optimize and do stuff right for that. But since in Godot it's more general purpose, it needs to focus on algorithms that are more flexible rather than like advanced or new. That said, one of the things that are being done with the new render in Godot 4 is that it's very flexible. You can just write a completely different render and have it pluggable. That wasn't very possible before, but now it is. So on the plans is eventually to have a very high-end render that is like only high-end consoles or maybe high-end desktop GPUs that uses ray tracing and all the new stuff that's more modern, to have something more like film quality. So this will use temporal anti-aliasing and a lot of different things. So it looks more like movie-like or these kind of things. So you can use it for very high-end games, or if you want to use it, like for example, in industrial design, in movies or stuff that is not so much video games. That will be mostly useful for that. But for making most of the games, you don't really need that, because it gets in your way when you want to do something that is not so complex or want to target low end and these kind of things. So the idea is to have two renderers in Vulkan, at least one that is like the flexible render that works like for most people, and then a very high end one that you're probably not going to be shipping your games with that, because if you make an indie game, nobody's going to be able to play it unless they have a really high-end stuff with ray tracing and everything. But it can be used for like if you really want to make something with a lot of investment in graphics or industrial design or this kind of thing, then it's going to be useful. But yeah, that's the plan, but that's not going to happen until Godot 4.1 again, because again, the idea is to have something working first that we can test and accommodate and change. And the more like minimum viable product we can ship will be the best. Then we can add stuff over it when we know it works and it's doing everything as it should.
Thanks. So there's a question which is maybe for George, since he's ramping up on getting to know GDNative. Are there any plans on making GDNative easy to get started? It's a bit confusing for beginners now, like automatically generated project or some things.
Yes, so the plan is to really make it easier for beginners, especially for getting started. In particular for the C++ bindings, which are kind of official. And the idea is, yes, to have some sort of templates that can easily adapt for your project, and also some sort of plugin to maybe using Docker to use the build system for all platforms, so you can use just like click buttons and have everything built without having to set up everything. I mean, you do have some small setup, but it's like easier than like installing everything that's needed, every dependency, something like that. But yeah, so that's the plan. I'm not sure it's gonna be like a generate a project, but probably a template that you can use. And yeah, I guess that's it.
Maybe a question for Gilles, which is, if I find it back, will the new TileMap editor be only for Godot 4, or can we hope to get it backported to Godot 3.2?
Likely think it's going to be for Godot 4 only. I haven't like the first step to design the new editor is like going to start with designing the interface and the user experience. What do we want for the users? So I don't know yet how many changes this is going to imply in the API. Well, probably most likely that will stay only for Godot 4 because it's a lot of work. So yeah, it's unlikely we backport it to Godot 3 because it's going to be compatibility breaking. So yeah, the focus is to have something like which is like quite perfect with the best user experience for 4, and we will see if it can be backported, but I doubt it will be possible.
So another question about Godot 4 is, will Godot 4 features like volumetric lights and SDFGI work on GPUs that don't support Vulkan?
Definitely not.
And so neither of those would be implemented for GDS3?
The problem is that you need compute shaders to do all this, and GLES3 doesn't have compute shaders, and you can kind of hack around in some cases when you don't have compute, but in others it's impossible. SDFGI is very compute intensive. It does like ray tracing of voxel data on GPU, so that's not doable without compute, so it's not possible. The volumetric lighting is kind of the same. It also needs compute because of the way it requires to just like compute everything, I guess. Because like, just to give you an idea, both kind of effects work on like 3D data, like a kind of like a grid. Like the volumetric fog is like a grid that's attached to your frustum that is 3D, and likewise the SDFGI also works with 3D stuff. And if you don't have compute, you can only work on 2D stuff like frame buffers. So if you need more flexibility in there, there's no option than using compute. So yeah, it's going to be Vulkan only because of that.
Yeah, and I think for OpenGL, even if we wanted to use OpenGL Compute, it's in OpenGL 4.2 or something, and any device that supports it supports Vulkan, so it's kind of no point.
Yeah, but also there's a problem with Android. I think that it's not well supported. Even when the GLES version supports it, it doesn't need to support compute. So it's kind of hit miss. And the implementations are not really good. And so it's not really worth it, in my opinion.
So a question which might be useful for some who don't know about it. Is it possible inside the project folder to filter out specific directories or file extensions from being imported by the editor? Who wants to answer that?
I know that you have the gdignore file that you can put in a folder. It's going to. I'm not even sure if this is documented. Now that I think of it, that could be good to check in the documentation. But I think Gilles probably knows more because he wrote the file system doc.
Not that much actually. Like the goal is to filter.
Yeah, to prevent a folder from being exported. So you can add a file in the folder called .gdignore, and that will this folder will become invisible to Godot. So I guess that's something that we should document because even on the core team, not everyone seems to know about it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I just forgot about it. I think they use it in GDNative projects also, so they don't scan the binaries on this kind of thing. So it's there, but probably not documented.
Yeah, it can be quite convenient if you store like your game design documents or stuff in your project folder and you don't want all the pictures from this folder to be imported as resources in the project since you're not going to use them. So there's a question on the plans to move C# away from Mono and to .NET Core, .NET 5. Yes, there are plans. I don't know what they are exactly. I need to actually coordinate with Ignacio to know what are his current plans. But so Mono has been merged into .NET runtime. And from what I discussed with the Mono team, all development now happens on .NET runtime. And the current Mono version that we're using, 6.12, is the last Mono standalone version. So eventually we will definitely want to migrate to the new all integrated solution, but I don't think it's that simple. We have to check how it's done exactly. But eventually, yes, that's probably something that's going to happen in the coming 6 months, probably. So there's a question on when are the SkeletonIK improvements going to be added to a stable release? Will that be Godot 4? So that refers to the work done by Noah for Google Summer of Code. So this is so there's a big pull request which is targeted towards Godot 4, and some of it I think I also included for Godot 3.2, like to fix issues. So most likely the new features are going to stay for Godot 4, but some of the bug fixes are going to make their way to Godot 3.2 so that the existing features can be used in a more stable way. So a question for Juan. Are there any plans to increase the default lighting limits of 8 of any type of light per mesh?
The limit is already lifted in Godot 4. You can have as many as you want. So there's no limit because it uses cluster rendering. For 2D, the limit is 16 lights. If you per object, there's a limit of 16 lights that can lit an object, plus the directional lights that are going to be added like in the coming days. So those are the limits so far.
And another question on rendering is, would the rendering differences mean that you wouldn't be able to switch a project from Vulkan to OpenGL or the other way around?
I think they will be quite compatible. The main difference will be that when you use Vulkan, you have access to rendering device, so you can write like custom code everywhere. You can use compute and all the modern stuff. And when you use OpenGL 3, a lot of things will work, but everything that requires compute will not work. So also many of the implementations of the effects, like for example, just to give you an example, all the post-processing, ambient occlusion, and everything on Vulkan is using compute because it's more efficient. But on the GLES3 port, is going to not be able to use it, so it's going to be more limited. So you probably will see like different ambient occlusion or different glow because the ones on OpenGL will not be using compute. But it's mostly like some features are not going to be available on GLES3, but majorly I think they will work. If you want to make a game and go from one engine to the other, they are going to look pretty much the same. They are going to have different limitations, but the look should be the same, which wasn't the case when we had GLES3 and GLS2. They look different because GLES3 works on linear color space and then GLES2 it doesn't. But now it's going to be a lot more compatible. I still don't suggest that you use something as a fallback, because if you make a game for Vulkan, it should work only on Vulkan. And if you make a game that you want it to work on GLES, you should probably make it only for GLES and don't use the Vulkan features. It's not designed to be a fallback, if that's maybe a question. But yeah, that's going to be the current limitations.
And another question about those is whether the presence of Vulkan, GLES3, and GLES2 renderers all at once will it increase the size of the engine, even if the exported game only uses one of them?
The idea is that you can compile them out if you build your own templates. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we have been discussing for Godot 4 is having more options to compile out parts of the engine. So if you want to make your own builds with only what you need, you will have a nicer interface and you will be able to compile it like just so you use what you need and make a binary as small as possible. So that's kind of the plan so far. But also one of the things that we discuss is that we need to supply a way so you can recompile everything yourself. I mean, we discussed this for GDNative, but the idea is that you can also use the same system for the engine itself and the editor, where you can just like get like an image with all the tools already configured, and then you just request it, okay, build this GDNative model for all the platforms, or build the engine with the editor with these options disabled for all the platforms. So it's much easier for you to do it. We can do this because most of the toolchain that you use to compile Godot for all the platforms is open source. The only limitation you're going to have with this is that for building for Apple, like iOS and Mac OS, we use something called OS X Cross, which lets you compile for those platforms, but it has a limitation that it requires that you obtain the SDK and headers from a Mac computer, where you obtain this legally, of course, so you can put them in the thing to compile for Mac. You will need to do this step manually, like the same way if you compile for iOS and Mac, you probably will need to do it anyway. But to have those templates compiled, you will need to obtain this for your SDK. We will try to make it as easy as possible, like put this on a Mac computer and run this script, and then it's going to configure the compiler for you. So that's kind of, maybe Remy wants to talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, that's so yeah, just specifically about the Vulkan renderers, it will be easy. The renderers, it will be easy to compile them out. I don't know if it will make a lot of difference in the size of the engine, because I don't think like that they makes so much of it, but it's definitely possible. So when you're really size constrained, that's a good option. And yeah, basically, we already have a set of containers that we use for official builds, and the plan is to make those available to everyone so that you can, using Docker in just one simple command that will provide a tool to enable that, you will be able to recompile the engine with some configuration that you have. So eventually in the future, it might be much easier to make like your own Godot build using the same kind of parameters and tool chains that we use for the official build. So you know you will get the same kind of performance, unless you improve performance yourself, but like you will get the same conditions, which is also good to, because it can be quite tricky sometimes if you have to build the engine yourself for different platforms. Like you don't necessarily have the same expertise that we have when doing the build, so you might forget some of the options which make it faster, or you might ship a debug build by mistake, or there are lots of things that might not be very obvious to someone that wants to make an optimized release build for all platforms with custom code. So that's why we want to provide tooling that makes this basically a one-click solution, and then just wait, because it's going to take some time to build, but it should be simple to do. So there are lots of questions on exporting custom resources. That's a very popular proposals that we have on the proposal repository. So like exporting with the export keyword in GDScript. So there is several actually, but there is currently an active pull request that implements this for Godot 3.2, which was rebased and improved from another older pull request. So there's a lot of work that has been done on this area, and it's fairly mature by now. So it's probably going to be merged soon once the last concerns are addressed. And for Godot 4, this would probably need to be forward ported, because currently the work was done for Godot 3.2. But there's a lot of work going on GDScript right now in the master branch, so it's not so easy to try to actually test this kind of changes, because GDScript might crash on you for other reasons. We have the culprit here, but he's doing a great job at. If you haven't seen it, you can check on the Godot website, one of the recent dev blogs from George about the type virtual machine for GDScript, which is going to yield very interesting performance improvements as soon as you start using the typing hints in your code. So that's really nice. So yes, custom resources, that's, we don't forget you. We know that's a very highly anticipated change. So there's quite a few questions. I guess it's a hot topic, and it's going to stay a hot topic every month. There's a lot of questions on the transition between Godot 3 and Godot 4. So whether one will be able to import a project, like to open a Godot 3 project directly in Godot 4. We lost connection with many. No, I did.
No, it's fine.
All right. Happens. It's coming back. Sorry. So yes, basically how the workflow will be for moving a Godot 3 project into Godot 4. So we don't know all the specifics yet, but what I can say is that we already have some compatibility aliases for like all the nodes that were renamed. For example, spatial became node 3D. So when you open a scene with a spatial, like in the scene file, Godot 4 will know that it has to convert that to node 3D, and it will open it without problem. On the other hand, your scripts that refer to spatial currently will not be fixed, so you will have to fix that manually, but it's in script, so it's like there's a lot of good tooling for replacing strings in text files. And we might have some tooling to help automate that also, but further along, like when Godot 4 is a bit more stable. But yeah, basically to answer shortly, no, you will not be able to just open the project and have it work, but you should be able to open the project and then fix it so that it works again. That's kind of the idea. You should like your scene should be compatible, and then we will have a porting guide that explains like all the major changes that you have to take into account when moving from Godot 3 to Godot 4. I don't know if others want to add something to that.
For GDScript, for instance, I think we want to provide some sort of tool to make that kind of easy. It's not going to be perfect, definitely. Like you still have to do something manual, and it's possible that it's changing something that it shouldn't. But it might get, like if you have a somewhat big project, it might go a long way to have this done automatically, especially on the syntax changes. But yeah, you definitely need manual work, especially on the script side. One.
So another question, that's maybe either for Juan or for Hugo. I think you also know about that, the state. Will Godot 4's shadow system be reworked, since it's a bit inefficient when it comes to contact shadows and so on?
Yes, so I can answer that. So in Godot 3, you may know that there is a property in OmniLight and Spotlight that is called contact. It improves shadow rendering by performing some kind of ray trace shadow, not really, but it will add a shadow to mask the shadow bias that may be missing. But it's buggy and it slows down rendering a lot. So if the camera get close to the shadow, to the contact shadow, you may have a very low frame rate. So in Godot 4, we decided to remove contact shadows and replace them with what we call shadow pancaking, which is a way to improve shadow rendering by decreasing the visible bias on shadows, but without introducing artifacts. And in fact, it is the same technique as is used in Unity. So in Godot 4, you will get much better shadows out of the box without having to configure anything. So we think that it's a win for everyone.
So one question, is there a plan to create an official newsletter for Godot content? News, endorsed tutorials, YouTube channels, like some other engines are doing? Not really, but I mean, if there was a lot of demand for that, that's something that can be considered, but there are already some community
Yes,
members.
also for Godot 4, we implement bias.
Sorry, we had some crash into different talks at the same time.
Yes,
All right, we are back. Sorry for the downtime. Looks like the live stream key just decided to change. So I was saying, about having an official newsletter with stuff. So there's some community members that try to do that already. There's currently a new one called This Week in Godot or something, which you can find on Twitter, which lists every week some interesting resources from basically what happens in the Godot community. So yeah, if there's a lot of demand, maybe if someone wants to do it and then be dubbed as official, but the problem with newsletter is that sending email is actually fairly complex. If you don't want to be flagged as spam in today's highly spam-heavy world. And sorry, I was distracted by Gilles' cats fighting each other.
By the way, I've just found the name of the Twitter account. It's called the Weekly Wait.
I think that was the previous one, but I think this one is maybe no longer active.
Oh, was it?
But there's a new one which is called This Week in Godot, I think. Yeah. Thisweekingodot.com. I will share the link.
You have their Twitter too.
And you can subscribe to that as as a newsletter so that you get it by email. So yeah, it's quite nice. Yeah, they find lots of interesting resources. But yeah, we're not against making that official eventually. Just it's work. I already tried to like signal boost a lot of stuff shared around Godot Engine on Twitter. So, but putting that down in a text format to send every week would require some dedication that probably wouldn't have time for right now. So maybe later on. So let's fish for another question asked recently. Can you run the compiled game without having the console open? Yes, you just have. So I expect that means you're talking about Windows, because on Windows, when you export a debug build, it will use a terminal so that you can see the actual error messages from the debug game. But if you export a release build, which is what you should do when shipping your game, then you don't have this terminal.
And you have to make sure to fix all the errors that appear in console before going for release. That's something that most people, well, not most people, but a lot of people complains about. But when you compile and release, we remove a lot of checks from the engine in order to make sure that the game runs at the maximum performance possible. So if you see like errors on the console and you don't fix them on release, your game's probably going to crash or something like that. So make sure to fix your bugs before going on release.
Right. That's maybe something we should clarify in the exporting documentation, that it's always a good practice to do debug exports, check the terminal, and fix every red entry that you see, which should be the same that you see when playing the game through the editor. So it's probably easier to fix in the editor. But yeah, as Juan said, if you ship a game with errors, it might not go well. So are there any projects decided for Google Summer of Code 2021? Not yet. We haven't thought about it much. Yeah, that's usually something that we do more during like late December or in January. So like quite close to the deadline, because Godot changes very fast. So the project we would think about now, maybe by like when Google Summer of Code starts, it's June or May. Like we have very little visibility in what will we need to have implemented, or what will make sense to implement in June. So we delay this. But if you have ideas, you can definitely already get in touch with us and try to get some feedback on whether that's a good idea, because like the best kinds of projects are projects that kind of spawn from a common interest, both from the students and from us, to say, yeah, that's a great idea. You have a good proposal. Here's how to make it better. And then when you actually make the formal proposal for Google Summer of Code, we kind of half decided already that we are very interested in your project because we designed it together. So you should not hesitate to come on the developers IRC channel and talk about your ideas. On the other end, if you come and ask us for our own ideas, we might maybe not have some, or like we might also get the question many times a day. So if you have your own thing you want to work on, that's really great. But we will also have some suggestions by March. So when I use 3D in Godot 3, there are lags when the engine is compiling shaders. Will Spurvy improve this? We had this question a couple times.
Yes, in Godot 3, shaders are compiled on demand, while in Godot 4, we don't pre-compile the shaders like other engines do, because we still want to be as flexible as possible. but the shaders compile when the material loads. So, and also the shaders will be caged, so that's going to improve hugely. But for the most part, what happens in Godot 3 is that if something changes in the combination of state, it needs to recompile a new shader, while in Godot 4, all the combinations are already precompiled. So you're not going to see stuttering in the middle of the game. At least you shouldn't with a decent driver. Maybe there's a driver that like pushes back for some reason compilation, but that's not should be something normal. At least on desktop and most mobile, you shouldn't see this problem.
So question partly for Hugo. Will C# get better documentation in Godot 4?
Part of my work in my contract has been about creating a system so you can switch between snake case syntax and PascalCase syntax in the documentation. So, for example, below the search bar, you will have a button to switch between the two syntaxes. So, as you may know, snake case is for people who use GDScript, and PascalCase is for people who use C#. So if you use C#, you will have to click the PascalCase button, and it will remember the setting. And when you load a documentation page, it will show the correct syntax for properties and method automatically.
And additionally to that, we also have a contributor implemented in the master branch support for having both GDScript and C# code blocks in the class reference. So whenever we put examples in the class reference, so like the documentation of each node, currently it's only GDScript there, but you will be able to have, like in the rest of the documentation where currently you have tabs for each language, you will also have these tabs in the API reference. And this might be backported for Godot 3.2. It's just like this contributor who implemented this now is also doing a lot of work to actually convert the code blocks. And it's been spending already countless hours working on all classes, starting by A, B, and C. So there's a lot of work to port everything. So I guess the porting will happen. Porting that to Godot 3.2 will be once it's more complete, so that you actually have useful documentation and not just some C# snippets here and there. Otherwise, you already have fairly good documentation for C# when you use it from any of the supported editors. Like you have very good IntelliSense and code completion with full documentation on all the methods. So it's already quite well self-documented, but we want to address the part around the human written tutorials where you actually like have content currently tailored for GDScript, which we can make a bit more flexible. Did we get any updates on creating a series of Godot Engine open game projects? So like, yeah, we talked at some point that it would be nice to make an open project like Blender does with their open movie projects. So where we could have an open game project made with Godot. I don't really have progress on that, I would say. We are swamped with work on the engine itself, so it's hard to find time to organize something like that. I think we would probably wait for Godot 4.1, like so that the Godot 4 series is very mature to maybe start looking a bit more seriously into that. But part of our idea was to try to also like go to Amsterdam and meet with the Blender people and do something together. And with the current pandemic and world situation, it's not really an option. So that's, yeah, there's no concrete plans right now, I would say. But it's still something we would like to do at some point.
So we still have the project from Fernando, no?
Mm-hmm.
On track.
Right, we have our own open project, but currently there's only one person working on it, who is Fernando, who is doing a lot of artwork, modeling, and very nice levels for an upcoming game that we want to make to showcase features in Godot 4. Like for Godot 3, we had the third-person shooter demo, also with art by Fernando. And Godot 4 will probably have its own demo with a nice 3D platformer. I guess maybe Juan knows more about it, but for now it's still in the assets making phase. There's no actual game to play yet.
Yeah, we're working on it. Fernando is working alone on this, and it's taking a while. But hopefully in the coming months, we're going to be able to put stuff together. He already made the character, the enemies, all the animations, and he already made the level blocking, and now he's detailing all the level to make it look like as amazing as possible. So hopefully by the time Godot 4 comes out, there's going to be this new demo. I mean, like we did for Godot 3.1 with the TPS demo, there's going to be a new demo with more complex art using all the beautiful effects and these kind of things.
So finally, I have a question for Fabio. So we can wake you up a bit.
Yes.
If I find it back. Are there any plans to implement methods for NAT hole punching in the high-level API for Godot 4?
Not right now. I would say if we ever I would say that it's something that should be supported by the network peers themselves. So before doing the starting the exchange of the high-level multiplayer, so when you set up the peer, you can do some of it. With the inet library, but you need some custom code. So there is no you need some form of micro protocol, and I would say that because you need to set up and open a port and have a server that you can actually contact to open your port basically and do the hole punching. I don't think that's something can be general. That's not something that can be generalized too much. I think it's something that someone should do. Maybe we could do an asset library entry, and we could be able. Maybe it's something that we could investigate. We could provide a stun server because stun server are not expensive. And then maybe we can have some API, like some module, like the UPnP module. We can have something like that for doing stun, which is a method to basically do hole punching and nut traversals that relies on an external server, but it's only used to trick your own nut to open the port, basically. The subject is a bit complicated. There are various methods to do it depending on the kind of network you are in. It's never 100% reliable. But I think it should be in the asset library and not included in Godot to avoid bloating too much. But it probably stun is the right way to go. What we need to make sure, and we will try to make sure, is that you can set up your network peer specifying the port they have to open, they have to use, they have to ask the operating system. So then you can use a general packet peer UDP to do the hole punching, and then you can bind the inet peer to the same port and have it already open in the NAT through the asset library or whatever method you used to open it and then use it. So we will definitely, I will go through especially the inet library. WebRTC already does that, so there's no problem with that. For WebSocket, it's not really possible because it's TCP. there's not much you can do there. But for eNet, I think the eNet library, I think I mentioned it also the last Q&A, needs a little bit of refactoring to expose a bit more of what can be achieved with eNet, and at the same time to unbloat a bit the simple interface for the multiplayer API. So I'll probably make a proposal for that to kind of, and hopefully that will help with the hole punching too. Long and a bit complex topic, but I hope people understood.
So, am I still? No, yeah, I'm not muted. Will the improvement? Yeah, sorry. Question is a bit tricky grammatically. I don't get it. Sorry. So, are there any specific testing practices to follow, like unit integration tests when contributing to the Godot code base? So maybe Hugo can talk about that since you worked on it.
About unit tests?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So recently we have a contributor who implemented support for the testing framework DocTest, which we merged in March or April. And since then, we are now accepting pull requests that add new tests, unit tests specifically. And I have contributed many tests as well. So now every time you open a pull request, we have a GitHub action, which is our continuous integration system. And it will run the unit, it will compile Godot and run the unit test. So we now have more confidence that we avoid to introduce a regression since every commit is now tested. But as always, we welcome a new test specifically about core classes which can be tested easily. Because right now our system can't test things like rendering or physics because they are not deterministic. But we could test things like the translation system or image loading or stuff like that.
A question maybe for Gilles. Any idea how difficult it would be to allow the user to move the file system dock to the bottom panel where the output debugger is?
I think I had this question before. Someone asked in IRC. So the answer is that, or maybe the answer is that it's not simple right now because the whole editor doesn't support moving editors around, but on the left and the right you can move the docks. But from now, this the only thing you can do. The problem with that kind of proposal is that Godot basically is really context aware. So you click on something and everything opens so that you can edit it. So the bottom panel adapts, the inspector adapts, everything changes so that you click on something, you're ready to go. This makes things harder to customize because we still want to keep this ease of use, the fact that when you click on something, everything opens and you don't have complex menus where you have to go in that tab to edit this thing and that kind of thing. So having more customization is a possibility, but we have to design this with keeping in mind the fact that this context awareness should be kept inside the editor. But I have some ideas about that, but this requires a formal proposal so that we put everything on paper and discuss about it. So yeah. So right now it's not doable, if that's a question, the initial question, but it could be after a big rework of the editor.
George, is there anything already planned with the new abstract code generator for GDScript?
Plans, there are a lot, but nothing really started. Like one of the plans is to add code optimization for GDScript, so it optimizes the user code, and the abstraction kind of helps in that regard. There was a contributor willing to do this. I'm not sure if he's doing something, but if he's not doing something, eventually I'm getting into that. The other idea that we have is compiling to C or compiling to LLVM or something like that, but we have no clear path for that yet. We need to figure out what's the best way to do it and what's most useful for the users. But I mean, having this already makes a lot of things easier. Even the changes that I'm doing right now are a lot easier with this abstraction. But I mean, we're gonna see what's gonna happen. It's probably gonna take a while until it's really useful for different backends.
So, are there any plans for unit testing features inside the Godot IDE? So I would say no plans currently. It's not something completely excluded, but we find that it's the kind of thing which is best served by plugins. And there are already pretty good plugins for unit testing of your Godot games. So since those plugins are good, we don't really need to re-implement them ourselves, I would say. I can put some links in the chat. There is Gut. And I don't know if it's unit testing or more like integration testing, but there is WAT, W-A-T, and G-U-T, Gut, Godot unit testing, which are used by quite a few Godot users. So I don't have experience with them myself, but I think they must be good since many are using them. So, well, one question I can answer maybe, how are the TileSet improvements going? Gilles talked about it, but since Gilles is starting to work next week, I guess you will have more info about that next month.
Yes, this is planned. So we talked about it last session, I think, but the plan is first to make a huge proposal. Yesterday, I made a tweet on Twitter asking people what they liked into other TileMap, TileSet editors. So the idea is to gather ideas and things people would like to be implemented and what they like in other editor, and make a proposal out of it to have like a good idea before implementing everything. And I'll ask people for comments on the proposal, obviously. So you can come and give feedback and yeah.
So a question for Juan. That's always a hot topic, so it has to come back this time. Do you know yet how occlusion culling will work in Godot 4? Will the system be pluggable?
We're still discussing how to do it with other contributors. There's quite a lot of ways to do occlusion culling. The main thing, as always, that I say is that it's not something that you just turn on and magically makes things faster. It's something very context aware. If you misuse it, it's going to hurt your performance more than help it. So you need to exactly know what you're doing, I guess. But the idea is that it's probably mostly going to work by pre-baking some of your geometry and then using this to do the occlusion culling, because the problem you have generally is that if we make GPU only occlusion cooling, like for example, take the previous frame buffer reproject it and test something, and then use conditional rendering to not render objects, you're not going to get that much of a performance increase. It's going to kind of maybe get you a bit more performance. The real performance increases with occlusion cooling are usually when you have interiors, like levels inside of a building or something like that, with many rooms that are not visible from one point. That's a real place where you're going to get the most. Like for exteriors, there's not really much of a win using occlusion cooling, unless you're like in a city with a lot of buildings or something like that. In which case, yes, it will be better. But then again, it's probably going to be something where you just pick. I want to put all these objects together, and I want to bake an occluder for this, and you will have like occluders that will just be there. That will probably like be ray traced on CPU or something like that, because you ray trace to a very small frame buffer in CPU, and then you test like the axis aligned boxes from like everything you want to test occlusion against or something like that. But yeah, it's going to probably require pre-baking. We're still discussing with our contributors what will probably be the most usable way to do it, but that's going in that direction. Next week is going to be work on this anyway, and then the next weeks.
So there's a question on what the current plans are for localizing the documentation. So for those who don't know, the documentation is already localized in quite a few languages. So when you go to the documentation page, like docs.godoengine.org, at the bottom left, there's a panel you can expand, and you can see the languages which are available. Normally, it should auto-detect if there's one that matches your browser locale. Not all of them are complete. Like the most up-to-date are French, Japanese, German, Spanish, simplified Chinese, Russian, traditional Chinese, and then the other ones are more like below 50% of completion, but it still means that there's a lot of content which is localized. And if the question was more specifically on the class reference, which is currently not localized on the live instances, so like the documentation for each class in the Godot API, this can already be localized in the master branch, but I decided not to backport that change to the 3.2 branch because the work that is necessary to translate all the class reference is huge, and I think it's better spent focusing on the Godot 4 API, which is going to change quite a bit. So I prefer that translators don't spend like literally hundreds of man hours working on documentation that might, in big parts, need to be updated, and some of it will be obsoleted. So Godot 4 will have localized class reference for at least some of the languages where the contributors are active. For those who want to help with translation, I can link the documentation about it. So you can have an introduction to the various resources that we have that can be translated. So could there be a way to automate the conversion of GDScript files into a GDNative library? Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's always a way. It's just not easy, just how much effort we want to put on that. And I don't think it's trivial to do, and I don't think it's gonna help as much as people think this would help. So it's probably not something that we're gonna work officially, at least not like this.
I was wondering, since like behind GDScript, we will be able to have several backends, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
In the next version. So is there a way this could like not really transform to GDNative, but have native performances there?
Yeah, that's what we were discussing before. Like there were some plans to do LLVM, which would essentially compile to LLVM, and then from LLVM you can compile to anything native for any platform, pretty much.
Okay.
Or we could do like translate to C, and then from C we compile to any platform. But not necessarily GDNative. It can be something like in GDScript itself.
Okay.
And for those interested in trying something now, there's a Godot user who posted recently about a work in progress plugin called GDPP, GDScript++, that can convert GDScript to GDNative C++. So I can put a link in the chat for those who want to check it out. All right, what's next? So I see quite a few questions that we already answered in previous month. So I suggest that those who haven't seen the previous Q&As can look at them, because each of them has a table of contents when you can see all the topics that have been discussed. So you can directly go to the relevant part and have some explanations on these topics. So any advance on the Kickstarter-like approach to funding new features? It's in discussion, I guess. Maybe Juan wants to say something about it.
No, nothing much. It's an idea that's going around that maybe for some very specific things we can do a crowdfund to hire a contributor for a limited amount of time, because this is for a specific feature. Like, as you can see, like everyone who is on this like on this chat on the video we are all hired by the project, but we are all usually, well, say maybe I am more like a general tech lead and Remy is the project manager, but the other guys are mostly focusing on special areas that need ongoing work, and there's a lot of there's so much to do in those areas that they are pretty much hired full time. But there are areas that don't require that much. I mean, it's just working on it, making sure it works, and that's it. We did this, for example, for the X11 fixes, because X11 is an extremely difficult API. So we hired somebody for 2 months to do all the fixes, and this person worked and did all the fixes, and that's it. There's an idea now to do something like this for physics, so we can refactor the physics engines and just let them working. There's well, for the internationalization work, there's something similar. So yeah, we are discussing this more of on a case by case scenario, and usually there has to be a contributor that has experience and time to do it, because as I mentioned many times, it's not like we just do a bounty and then whoever does the work gets paid. Because what usually happens is that to integrate something properly to the engine, you need to understand how to do it. You need to have a lot of experience working with the engine. If not, you're going to need a lot of time from someone who is already working for the engine to review the bounties and say, okay, this code could be different. We need to change this. And this requires a lot of time of a person that we are already hiring to do something else. So it would be counterproductive to do work with bounties. But when it's a contributor that we know that has done really good job in the past, and this person is available to work, then it's more like an opportunity that we don't want to let pass, and we're okay, then we can hire this person who already has proven that this person can work on this and do it reliable, and this needs this amount of money, and then if we can make this money happen, then we can make this feature happen. But it is very very dependent on having the right person at the right time to do. It's not so much that we can just go out and do bounties and expect that to work, because it won't work.
So there's a question which came back a few times, which is, when is the new asset library going to be released? What I can say about that is that we don't know yet. So Hugo made a new a new front end for the asset library website. So which is like with better features, better code, easier to maintain. But we still have a lot of work and of design work to do on what kind of features we want to support exactly. For like, especially if you look at the current asset library, it was kind of a first draft where we put up something which works, but with the idea that it would be refined further, and then it was never really refined much. So, for example, my opinion is that the categories on the asset library don't really fit the things that people actually share on it. And we also had very specific technical requirements on how you can upload a set. So it's a nice way for people to share stuff, but it's definitely not as good as it can be. So I would say the ETA for the new asset library would be like the release of Godot 4, because we will want to have a new asset library for Godot 4. It will probably require changes to the engine itself to better support like the new workflows. So I don't know if we would support Godot, earlier versions of Godot in the new asset library. Maybe we will figure out a way to have like compatibility for the old API. I don't know, Hugo, if you thought about that yet.
Do you mean testing the API in the editor?
Yeah, I mean, being able to access like the new asset library from Godot 3.
Yes, but there are some technical issues depending on the web server that hosts the API. I think it is an issue with Godot and not specifically the API, since it has the same structure as the existing asset library API. This is something we need to debug further, maybe with Fabio.
Right. But so yeah, basically we have a good like technical rework, but it needs some more design thinking on what do we want the asset library, like the new asset library, to be like exactly. So that it's not again like an alpha version that works okay-ish, but where it's not like a great experience. So we're closing on 1.5 hours. So I'll try to pick a couple last questions, and then I think we'll wrap up. Serious one. Where's the cat? Come on.
There you go.
You had it like ready over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they were like going all around the house, running. So, yes.
So there's a question on what our plans are on like whether we will preserve compatibility between 4.x minor releases, or if one should sit out a couple of versions to wait for something really stable that will stop changing, like happened with 3.x.
Yeah, I think the version 4 is going to be. I think it shouldn't be too terrible as terrible as Godot 3 was, because it's only mostly rendering work and script work. It's not like so much core engine change that in Godot 3 we changed a huge amount of core engine, but in Godot 4 it's not that much. This is a lot more about rendering and scripting. So not probably going to be so terrible. I don't know, but that probably will need. I mean, the version 4 that we wish to have is probably not going to be version 4, but 4.1, because we need to eventually add OpenGL 3, and probably I'm not sure if the physics changes are going to make it for Godot 4. Let's hope so if we can get the money. But yeah, worst case is going to have to be like 4.1, like the version. But yeah, we'll see.
Mm-hmm. And I can say in terms of compatibility, like between minor releases, so like 4.0 to 4.1 to 4.2, we rarely break compatibility on purpose. We usually try not to break the API, so like the methods you use, so that when you have a script written for Godot 4.0, it should still work in Godot 4.1. But you have to keep in mind that any bug fix in a game engine breaks compatibility to some extent because there's always someone that relied on the bug as a feature. So if there's a rendering bug, something looks terrible because of a bug, and we fix it, maybe your game core design revolved around these broken looks, and then the fixed version will break your game. So if you rely on a bug, then you can just stay on the version with the bug, I guess. But fixing bugs or implementing new features will always have some degree of change to the behavior of your game. So it's never like upgrade and ship without testing. On the other hand, I can say that usually 98% of the features you're using on a game in like Godot 4.1 should keep working in Godot 4.2 and so on. I mean, that's from the experience of Godot 3. We did break compatibility on slight things when it was necessary to improve the experience for most users. But apart from some very specific things, and some of which are not made on purpose, but are actually bugs or like fixes that exposed pre-existing bugs, I often open projects made in 2018. I open them in Godot 3.2 and they work just fine. So we keep having the same kind of care to not needlessly break pre-existing projects. That's why Godot 4 is 4 and not 3.3, because Godot 4 will break pre-existing projects. You will not be able to just open your project and run it. So I think that's a good one to end. Let me just check if I found the last speak. No, I'd say we can wrap up now and say thank you everyone for a nice chat. Lots of interesting questions. We had exactly 100 questions in the chat, and we probably answered like 15 or 20. Takes
but
time.
I also answer many questions in the chat. So
right. So that's quite nice. Yet that's the chat is active even without us talking. So thanks everyone. We'll keep working hard on Godot, keep making nice improvements. I'm really hyped for the coming month where Gilles is going also to start working full time. So
yes, give
I'm
you
going to get some backup on reviewing the 1,000 pull requests that we have pending. And yeah, in general, regarding like the development timeline. So currently we are still in the really feature development phase. So where you can see Juan on Twitter posting lots of cool new rendering features. So there's a lot of wow effect, but that also means there's a lot of breakage in the master branch. So it's not at all ready to release. And within a couple of months, hopefully we will be done with all this. And then we will double down on fixing bugs, start doing stuff like porting demos, making new projects to be able to really test Godot 4 and make sure that it's working. And then have an alpha, have several alpha builds, ask the community to help us test everything. So it's an iterative process, but hopefully by the end of that process, we should have a fairly good Godot 4.0 that we are happy to release and build upon in 2021. So that's it. Thanks, and see you next time.
Yep. See you.
See
Bye-bye.
you. Thank
You
you, everyone.
everyone. Bye bye.